Welcome to the Great Language Partner podcast. I'm Katja.
And I'm Nicole. We are two neurodiversity affirming speech therapists on a mission to bring joy to your autistic child's communication journey.
Separately, we've helped hundreds of neurodivergent kids become confident communicators, but we know we can make an even bigger impact together. Whether you're a parent or professional, we're here for you as you navigate your unique journey.
We'll talk all things Gestalt language development, sensory processing, and beyond as we share practical tips and inspiring stories to help you become your child or student's greatest language partner.
Let's create a more understanding, supportive, and affirming world for autistic kids.
One conversation at a time. So today, Katya and I are here, and we thought it would be really fun if we kind of talked about what it looks like when we are supporting a stage 1 or early GLP, and they're using those gestalts that are not literal, and they have more of that meaning below the surface. And we've talked at length about these stories and how cute some of them are and how meaningful and just like profound. So we thought it would be a fun way to spend our time today to kind of dig into that. How are you, Katya?
I'm good. And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about because, there's always such fun and cute and really, meaningful stories that go along with it. So,
and it's like one thing about early Gestalt language processors is like they're so clever with the way that they communicate. And so whenever there are people out there who are skeptical about whether Gestalt language development or processing is a quote unquote real thing, obviously we all know here that it's real, but whenever somebody kind of questions that, I always just think to myself, explain the way that these kids are communicating then, because this is such a real thing when you're supporting autistic kids, that they are using these gestalts, which we historically called scripts or just delayed echolalia, and they're using them for a purpose. And, it's pretty much, in my opinion, it's always meaningful. It may not always be communicative. There are lots of different functions of echolalia, and, some are intended to communicate and interact, and some are more of what we call personal functions, where they're for like stimulation or regulation. They have like that, that quality to them as opposed to trying to engage with somebody. But regardless, all of that is meaningful to the child.
Yeah, and I always suggest to parents to treat it as meaningful until you are certain otherwise. So if your child's using a gestalt or a piece of delayed echolalia and you're not quite sure what the meaning is, or if it's meant as intentional communication for you, we can assume that it is and try to dig deeper before assuming otherwise. I think we both have some good stories that can kind of highlight what we're talking about here.
Why don't you go first? I feel like you have a couple really good ones that I want to hear again.
Okay. My favorite story is the baby deer story. And I always share this when I present because I think it's such a good example of how sometimes the simplest gestalt that seems not at all meaningful or emotional at surface level actually is tied to such a deep emotion and a really specific kind of time and place where the child picked it up. So anyways, my client was saying baby deer. And this is a story that mom told me. I wasn't there to witness it, but she told me that this child was telling her baby deer, and she was really adamant about it, baby deer. And mom didn't quite know what she was asking for or trying to express. So she showed her baby deer videos. That wasn't quite scratching the itch that she was trying to express. So she got her baby deer stuffed animal. No, nothing was quite getting at what she was trying to communicate. But she was still adamant, baby deer, baby deer. And then it hit mom. Oh, maybe this is the meaning. One day, Months ago, this child stayed home from school and watched Bambi on repeat when she was feeling really sick. Maybe baby deer is the gestalt that's kind of encompassing that moment in time. Maybe she's trying to express to me that she's not feeling well. So the next time the kid said, "Baby dear," mom replied, "Oh, I'm sick. I don't feel good." And finally, the child looked at her like, "Yes, you got it. Like, hello, that's what I've been saying the whole time." And I think it's such a clear example of how these gestalts often are not clear at surface level, but to the child, they are, and to the child, they're holding that whole place and time in their mind, and that whole all the emotions that came with that day of her staying homesick, that baby deer, that simple chunk of language was holding all of that for her. And that's what these gestalts do for kids, right? They're so meaningful and they are so powerful, and I think that's why so many kids have a hard time moving out of the early stages of natural language acquisition, moving past using delayed echolalia, because these pieces of delayed echolalia, that baby deer holds so much more meaning for her than just saying, "I'm sick," even though she knows what that means. Yeah. But that's one example that I share often.
And I love that one because it's such a clear demonstration of what a child who is a GLP might do with their gestalts, right? It's like that could have meant so many things. And really, it was tied to that specific experience of being sick and watching the movie. And it's also like kudos to mom for doing the detective work and not kind of giving up on it. Cause I think sometimes it can be really difficult to uncover the meaning of our kids' gestalts and figure out what it is that they're trying to communicate. But one thing that so many of our GLPs do when we get it right is that look of amazement, like that quick. And sometimes it's not even a look, it's just like I've seen kids where they're saying something and I get what they're saying and I repeat it back or I acknowledge it or I've like done what they wanted me to do. They don't even turn to look at me, but they like freeze in place. It's almost like they cannot believe that somebody picked up on what they were trying to say. So, I mean, imagine how powerful that was for that child to be able to recognize that somebody else was understanding their communication. So it's just such a great example. I love it. Every time you tell that story, it just is so powerful to me. I love it.
But yeah,
um
thank you for bringing that up, that moment of like, "Yes, you got it." We really wanna look for that when we're trying to guess what our kids are telling us, because we don't wanna put words in their mouth. We don't wanna assume that she means "I'm sick" and just model that instead and kind of, essentially replace her gestalt. We really want to model what they're truly wanting to say, and that can paying attention to their reaction to our guess is huge. And oftentimes I feel that moment of like, "Yes, you got it, like you get me," and that's exactly it. And if we don't get that reaction, whether they're looking at us or um, repeating it back or just pausing, and there's some pretty often profound indicator
yeah.
that like we got it. So if we don't get that, maybe we need to try again.
Yeah, that's such a great distinction that I think a lot of us have probably not really quite understood, especially when you are just kind of getting started with supporting a GLP. The distinction of we're not trying to replace their gestalts just with what we want them to say, right? It's like, in that situation, had she not meant that she felt sick and mom was just like, well, you need a way to describe that you're sick and I'm just going to model this. If mom modeled it and she had no kind of reaction, um, that's not what we're trying to do with our detective work. Really, what we're trying to do is get as close to the child's true meaning as possible and show them that we've understood. We don't care if they continue to say baby deer. I mean, of course, saying I'm sick is going to be a lot more easily understood by more people, right? But we want to get to the bottom of what the child's trying to communicate. And so it does take a lot of that trial and error, and we're not going to get it right every time. And so one of the things that, we always recommend that parents and professionals do, and something that I do with my GLPs and their families, is to not only just take note of what the child is saying, but also look at what are they doing when they say it, what's going on around them. Like, are there any factors in the environment that may be at play here? One example that comes up is if a child is saying or using their gestalt and they're doing it and pairing it with the same action every time, the action probably has something to do with it and it might give you more information. So when I think about our kids who use their bodies to act out their gestalts, which is another way we will label that as echopraxia, um, you have to be really paying attention and really tuned in to even notice that they are repeating an action. So I always like to tell parents, like, you might not get it on your first try, but if you can kind of gather as much information when it's happening as possible, then you're going to get a lot closer to the meaning. And sometimes there's going to be kids out there, and I have quite a few on my caseload, who have gestalts that I still don't know what they mean. I mean, it's been years we've been working together, and I probably never will, because they're so unintelligible, or they're, so quick, or they say them so quietly or just quickly, or whatever the case may be, that we might not ever get there. But the best thing that I know to do in those situations is to just respond and acknowledge and show them that I've heard them, maybe repeat it back with the same kind of inflection or emotion. Because one thing we also tell people to do is repeat kids' gestalts back to them. And I always think about this when I have a GLP who uses a gestalt that is long and unintelligible. This one comes to mind because he says it all the time. I have a little guy who always goes, "Bisa blah, bida goo," and it is stuck in my head like every single day almost. It gets so catchy. I have no idea what it means, but I say it back to him because when he says it, he's happy. Like, you can tell that it's like a happy, joyful gestalt. It's not an agitated or angry chunk of language. And so I think that when we tell people to repeat their kid, it's like, as long as it's a happy and you're connecting with them, don't repeat them just to repeat them. Like, if they're frustrated or angry, yeah, you can try to repeat what they're saying to help them get closer to what it is that they need or want to say. But I also think, like, it's not just about mimicking them back, it's about showing them that you're there with them. I feel like that's another distinction that kind of gets lost on social media and when we kind of explain it to people.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So thanks for highlighting that. Do you have any stories of doing the detective work? Because I have another that your little blurb there kind of reminded me of, but I want you to
Yeah,
share.
tell us. No, tell us.
I mean, I have many kids that, like you described, that have a lot of unintelligible language, or all of it is unintelligible, and I can like pick out those same sort of gestalts that are definitely gestalts because it's the same intonation every time, or it's paired with the same body language or body movements every time. But another example of a child who is intelligible, it happened pretty recently, and I did share about it on Instagram, but if you missed the story, he has lots of media gestalts. And so me and this child, he's pretty relaxed and chill. We were just sitting in the ball pit at my clinic and just hanging out. It was pretty quiet. And then another child comes in and jumps into the ball pit and starts making a mess and throwing balls around and being loud. And after a couple of minutes of that, my client stands up and he goes, "You splash it, you buy it." And I did not know what that was from, or what exactly he had in mind there. But immediately I cued into, what was going on in the moment, and just based on the way he said it and his body language, what might he wanting to be expressing in the moment. So I just thought quick and modeled like, get out of here. Because I assumed that he was a little frustrated by the child who had entered the room. And immediately he imitated me, get out of here. So it was clear to me that it was likely something that he was trying to say, or that model kind of landed for him. But
Right.
yeah, cueing into, their body language and what's going on in the moment. And then luckily the other therapist in the room was like, I know that Gestalt, it's from Elemental. And in the Disney movie Elemental, there's a scene where the water people, who are kind of chill, the fire people come into their store that they own and start breaking things and making a mess. And the dad water drop goes, you splash it, you buy it. And or maybe it was the other way around. The water people started making a mess. But
Yeah.
yes. So after I saw that scene, I was like, that's exactly what happened. They were just hanging out, chill, and then someone came in and started wreaking havoc. And he was basically telling them to scram. And it was like, it's so cool how these kids can always pick, like, they have so many gestalts in their mind and they can come up with the like perfect one to match the scene. Like self-generated grammar can't do that, not in the way that these gestalts can. Like these gestalts encompass so much, that whole scene of the movie. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's like way more than just the language, right? It's like the Gestalt takes in the whole of it. So it's like, for the child watching that scene, it was probably like the loud music that went with the scene, and the way that the people were moving and their facial expressions and the tone and the anger in their voice and the way that the characters were, running around or breaking things. Like that scene was obviously a heightened emotional context, and we know that that's when oftentimes our GLPs will pick up on language, when there is that emotional component, which is why I always say, like, you have to be mindful. You're not always going to be, but it's helpful to be mindful that when your child is having an emotional time or an emotional experience, whether good or bad, you should be mindful of the language that's going on around them and the language that you're using, because sometimes that's when they really are tapped into the language of the environment. And so whether intentionally or unintentionally, whatever language that you're offering in that moment could become a gestalt for them. And I one time I said to a parent, their child, and I don't remember the exact specifics of what was happening, but their child was frustrated. Like there was something going on. They were having a moment, and we were trying to figure out what show they wanted to watch. There was something to do with the iPad and their frustration. And eventually we settled on a show and we gave it to the child, but they were really frustrated. But there was some kind of like repetitive language on this show that we gave him. And I said to her, I guarantee you this is going to become a gestalt for him because of the fact that he's watching it. He's feeling frustrated. It was similar to the people on the screen. It was really repetitive, lots of musical and intonation elements. And it's so funny. And I don't know for sure that it did, but I wanted to point that out for her because those are the moments when in real time we might see a child's kind of wheels spinning and them taking in the language of their surroundings, which is essentially what a gestalt is. And I don't know
Yeah.
about you, but gestalt, the word gestalt to me, is so freaking hard to say. Like it's just such a tough one to just say in general, but then also to really define. I feel like we all try to do it justice, but it's a little bit more complex and nuanced than just delayed echolalia with meaning. Like I think that, you know, I try, you try, many of us are trying to really come to agreement on a clear kind of definition of a gestalt. But the closest way to describe it is kind of like what you described, where it's like it's language that was picked up from somewhere else, but it encompasses the whole experience or environment,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it usually has that emotional meaning. Have you
Yeah.
noticed your kids like having emotional meanings for their gestalts that are either their own emotions or also could be like a character's emotions. So they might have, so let me explain. So I've noticed, and I'm curious if you have that for my GLPs, like if they're dysregulated and frustrated or having a hard time, and they're watching a scene on their show or they're picking up on language, that language may become their gestalt for the way that they were feeling internally, right? I think we all kind of accept that that's how it happens for a lot of kids. But I've seen it the other way too, where the child may be totally fine. But the character that they're watching or somebody else that they're watching around them is having a moment, having a hard time, really excited, like experiencing that heightened emotion. And so even though the child is okay in the moment, that becomes a gestalt for them because it's so encompassing, like because it's so big, right? Have you
Yeah.
seen that?
Yeah, I mean, I have one older kid who comes to mind that he's like the only older kid that I currently support, and he's always, happy and calm in our sessions, but I think one time his dad yelled at him or his dad yelled at someone else or his parents were arguing, I don't know, but every session he'll just randomly start talking exactly in the dad's voice and be like, "Hey, why'd you do that? Don't do that." and then he just goes back to like being happy, but it's such like an angry moment. And yeah, it's clear he's not actually feeling that way. He's just remembering it and it's stuck. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly like what I'm talking about. There
Yeah.
was one kid on my caseload who used to go, and this was like, I mean, this was almost 10 years ago, but I can still remember exactly how he said it because we used to laugh. We had no idea why he was saying it and still don't, but he would go, "They're making money off of us." And he would say it when he was like getting annoyed by something. So now looking back, I'm like, it obviously had some component of frustration, or it was almost like when he didn't want to do what we were doing, he would be like, "They're
Mhm.
making money off of us." And he would say, "I have 5 kids. I have 5 kids." And I'm like, "No, you don't. You are 8."
He's sympathizing with that single mom. That's hilarious.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but we can totally tune into that and, use it for our own modeling. Like these kids love drama. So the more dramatic we can make our own models, the better. And I think that comes naturally for some of us and not so naturally for others. But if you're trying to teach like self-advocacy, don't just model like, "Oh, stop it, like go away." Like model it with anger because that's how they're feeling when they're using those words, and that's going to make it stick more than just your regular monotone voice. So like creating that dramatic moment and being as dramatic as you can in the way you say whatever you're modeling, whether it's a happy drama or a excited or scared or angry, it sticks so much more for most of these kids.
Have you seen my one little guy whose gestalt came from the Trolls movie?
Yeah, that's my favorite.
So it's so funny. I watch it anytime I'm having like a bad day. I'm like, "Well, I know something that could cheer me up. It's this video." First of all, he's the cutest thing, and he has a lot of those like one-liner gestalts that really just take you by surprise and make you crack up. But for anybody who hasn't seen this clip on my Instagram, we were playing with this like those blocks that are kind of tough to put together. They're kind of like spiky blocks, and you're supposed to push them together, and they're hard and they don't really work that well. They frustrate so many kids. I don't even know why we have them. But we were trying to build something, and he was getting annoyed because he couldn't get it to go together, and he couldn't. It was just a whole. He was trying to make it look like Mater from the Cars movies. There was all these different like layers happening, and I was trying to model the frustration because I could tell he was getting frustrated. So I wanted to show him a way to describe that or express it. So I went, "I'm frustrated." And to your point, like adding in that drama, I went, "I'm frustrated." And I like took my fist and slammed it onto the ground, which is something that I always do when I'm modeling frustration for these kids. I'm like, it's a wonder they're not walking around like slamming their fists down on things that some probably are. But he just pauses and I'm like, "Oh no." And he looks at me and he goes, "Oh my God." And I was like, first of all, I just thought it was the cutest thing. I had no idea that it was a script. I thought it was just him saying, "Oh my God," in a cute voice. Like, I didn't even think twice about it. But after he said that, I went out to his mom and I said, "I have to show you this video. It's like the cutest thing." And she watches it and she's like, "No, I have to show you this video. You're going to crack up." She puts on the Trolls movie to that exact scene. His delivery and the exact like sound of his voice, like he could have been that troll.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Trolls scene, it was like the one troll, I've never seen the movie, but in the scene, the one troll is like getting really mad and he slams something to the ground very similarly to how I slammed my fist down. It was like the same thing. And my little client was using the line from the other troll who looks over like kind of like nervous and is like, "Oh my God." And it was just such like it was such a great example of this. But also sometimes these kids and their gestalts are just so funny. Like,
So
I don't,
funny.
it's so hard to not like laugh when they're not trying to be funny. But in this case, he knew it was cute and funny too. I think like he was smiling after because we were laughing so hard. But yeah, it's like sometimes their delivery is, if you had your eyes closed, you would not know it was not the real thing.
And the way he just immediately pulled that out, like
Immediately.
I've saw the clip and there's no hesitation. But I also I'm remembering that video that you posted, and I think you kind of caught yourself in the moment. Like, first you modeled just, "I'm frustrated," and it was like not all that emotion rich, and he didn't even bat an eye, like didn't really pay attention to the model. And then you repeated it again a few seconds later and you added that, "I'm frustrated," and you slammed your fist on the ground.
Yeah.
And that's when he picked it up and like at least, paid attention to it and took it in and like had something to say about it. So it's such a
Yeah, you're so
clear
right.
example of like, okay, we got to tune into how we're delivering these gestalts, because the quality of how we're delivering them is everything sometimes.
And some kids don't like a lot of that drama
Yes,
too, which is
yes.
so interesting, but also like it's so important to know. And a lot of people on social media will comment, maybe not so much anymore, I guess, because people now kind of know what to expect from my platform. But I feel like in the beginning, when I started to post, I would get comments from, random people, and they didn't really understand Gestalt language processing or what I was doing. And so they would take the way that I was talking with the child and they would comment on that and say, like, "Do you have to talk like that?" Like,
Mm.
they would like, and I'm like, first of all, blocked. Like, I don't know. But secondly, I did feel a little self-conscious when people would say that, but I also knew that they didn't understand why I was speaking like that. I'm not speaking in this high pitched like baby voice. That's not what we're trying to do. It's not about that. It's about really honoring the language with the emotional component, because that's how our GLPs take in language. And so it's not like I'm not just talking like this, like just for the heck of it. I'm like using intonation, not baby talk. And so when people will get that mixed up, or they'll say like, "Do you need to talk like that? Like, it's annoying." I'm like, maybe to you it's annoying, but it's the best way for me in this moment to have the child to get their attention and to connect with them that way. But that being said, not every child likes that really rich emotion. And some of my
Yeah.
kids prefer that I just like keep my lips closed and talk really quietly and I'll forget. I mean, I have maybe two kids on my caseload who do not want me to sing or even talk loudly. Like, and one child in particular will say, "No singing." If I just so happen to like accidentally slip and sing, and he'll give me a couple of those warnings. And it's so hard to stop though once you are so used to being in this like sing-songy kind of modeling, but really like tailoring it to the child and paying attention to what they like, is so important, because he does not like that at all. He would much rather me model really quietly and calmly, and then he will take the language in so much better. He's probably really sensitive.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because you're right. Like, some of my kids, I just try to add drama, but I find that every kid has a very particular kind of intonation that they're into, because these kids have such a good ear, but it does really vary. Like you're right. I have some kids who definitely don't like the sing song stuff. They want stuff that sounds like, I have one kid in particular who likes things that sound kind of more intense and like staccato. I don't know the musical terms, but that's like how he talks. So I just try to match how he talks, because how he's talking is the pieces that he's picking up. So I'm often just paying attention to how kids are talking and try to match the rhythm or pitch or kind of qualities of that, because what they're using is what they're picking up. So yeah, trying to
Or
really,
of the qualities of their shows that they're watching. Like if they're
yeah.
non-speaking, if your child or student is non-speaking, but they are always really gravitating to Coco Melon and super simple songs and things like that, you can kind of start to, and that's something that we go into in depth in my course, is noticing what the child notices, and like really not like going beyond the surface of like, okay, these are the things that they like. What do they have in common when it comes to like sensory wise? Like, are they seeking things that are really loud and chaotic, or do they prefer things that are more relaxed and slow? Are they, another thing we talk about with GLPs and their screen time, like they will sometimes change the speed. So they might make it slower or faster. Like, is your child slowing down the video? And do they like to watch things in slow motion, or are they speeding it up and they want to watch it really quick? And, so all of that, it's not meaningless. Like, every little bit of information you can get about your child or student is going to help you become a better, should I say, a great language partner to your child, because you have to kind of replicate or like emulate what it is that they are drawn to, or else you can't compete. I mean, you're not going to compete with JJ from Coco Melon if you aren't willing to look and sound silly sometimes. And
Mhm.
I think when I first started being a speech therapist, I would not have had the confidence that I have now to just let loose in my sessions the way that I do. I mean, there are things that I do for these kids that I'm like, my office has a clear door, like a glass door now. And there are sometimes people will walk by and I will make eye contact with like people walking down the hall to just like to head to their dentist appointment or something. And I have like a blanket over me and I'm like pretending to be a monster. And I just like make eye contact with these adults. And I'm like, just keep moving. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Keep moving. They're like, what kind of speech therapy is going on in here? But really, you have to do that for a lot
Yep.
of our kids to get their attention and to keep it. And that's why they're banging down the door trying to get in, because they know that you're going to be there acting a fool a lot of the
Yep.
time.
Totally. Absolutely. Same.
It is. And then I go home and I'm like, why does everything hurt? And like, I have no voice. Like, what did I, and I watch the videos back and I'm like, that tracks.
Yeah. Uh, and going back to doing the detective work, doing the work to figure out what is underlying these gestalts as we wrap up, do you have any tips for how parents or speech therapists can do this better? I think a big thing, like we've been talking about, is just really tuning into what kids are interested in and paying attention to. Like, obviously, if we know what their favorite shows and characters are, if they're using media gestalts, then it'll be easier to pick out maybe which ones they are and what scene they came from. So co-watching TV, if you have that ability, especially if you're a parent, can be huge. Oftentimes I think our kids will take us right to their favorite gestalts. I will often
Yeah.
with a new kid, like, let them access YouTube the first couple sessions, and they'll take me to their favorite gestalts more often than not. So it can be a good tool when you're just learning the child.
Yeah. And absolutely. I mean, I have my iPad kind of like available to any child in any session. Um, Pretty much unrestricted. Now, some kids need boundaries and families are not supportive of that kind of approach, which I respect as a parent and a professional. Like, I definitely defer to parents, but I always try to educate people that screen time is something that we kind of need to work with, because it's something that is not only just regulating for our GLPs, but it's also a big source of a lot of their language in many cases. But yeah, one of the ways that I always try to teach people to do this detective work is by working collaboratively, because there's going to be different gestalts in different settings, but there also may be certain ones that are kind of going across context. So one of the freebies that I have, and I'll link it in the show notes, is that Gestalt meaning tracker. And it's a Google Sheets document that you can use as a team. So in the show notes, you'll click it, you'll make a copy of it, save it to your drive, and then share it with your child's whole team or your student's team. And everybody can kind of work on the document together. So what I do with it is when I hear a new gestalt, whether I can make out the words or not, if I see or hear something that seems to be a gestalt for the child, I will go on to that meaning tracker and type it in. And then each kind of column has a different question that you can answer about the gestalt. And so while it's fresh in your mind and you just kind of saw the child or heard the child do it, you can answer questions like, what were they doing? How did it look like they felt? What did the intonation sound like? Even if you can just put an arrow in the direction of, was it like a rising intonation, like a question, or was it an angry sounding or like a downward falling intonation? What were they doing? Like, did they have toys in their hands? Were they reaching for something? What happened right before? Like, there are all these different factors to consider. And so on this shared sheet, you can kind of add to it and comment back and forth to one another to try to uncover the meaning. And what's great about it being this collaborative, like working document, is that you can put something on there and parents can just check into it and say, oh my gosh, look, he's saying, oh my God, at school, I should tell them it's from Trolls. And then they can pull the clip up for him. And then he's going to feel really understood. And then they can connect on Trolls. And then, kind of like unfolds. And that's a huge way to connect with our GLPs. But I think that document is one of the main things that I always recommend doing. And then if they are using screen time for language. So I think about a couple examples, and these came up recently, like this week, people commenting about the ways that their child is using their screen time gestalts or language from screen time. And the one person, I have to post this screenshot because it's so cool, and I've seen kids do this, but she says that when her child wants to make a sentence or she wants to use language that she cannot access or she's non-speaking, so she will pull up on one iPad a scene from Peppa Pig, and then on another iPad she'll pull up another scene from Peppa Pig, and she's basically mitigating a gestalt and making a new piece of language from two different chunks of language. So for example, if she wants to like go to the store, but she can't find just a sentence that really reflects what she's trying to say, she'll pull two different scenes and kind of like superimpose them together. Like, first of all, if your child is doing, they don't even have to be doing that. If your child is non-speaking, they should have access to high-tech AAC. And that's what I said back to this mom. I said, that's the most amazing thing I've heard. But also, she needs a device ASAP because she sounds like a kid who could really use AAC to communicate. And that's something that I also will recommend if you have a child who, even if they are speaking and they're GLP, AAC can be a huge tool. So I think of my student who loves the show Trash Truck, and there are 2 episodes that he watches on repeat, and like he's always watching. And so I don't necessarily know why or what the language from that clip or episode means to him. Instead of just kind of taking my time to figure it out, we recorded each of those little clips onto his AAC system in a folder from the episode. And so the goal with that would be that maybe he will show us when he activates it in the context where he's trying to communicate something that can help us get closer to the meaning. So if your child's using AAC, we definitely would want to program in those clips, even if we don't necessarily know what they mean yet, because that's going to help us get closer.
Beautiful. I love it. Yep.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So we'll link that in the show notes, but this is just the beginning of this kind of chat because this is something we could talk about all day. I mean, and you know what? If you have a story like this that you want to share with us, send us a DM or an email because we would love to feature some of your amazing kids or students in the way that they are using their language. So send us a message and tell us how your child or student is using their gestalts, and we'll be sure to have a whole episode where we highlight all of the amazing ways that our GLPs are communicating.
Yes, that would be super fun. But hopefully, this was helpful in kind of understanding what we mean when we're talking about doing the detective work and what that looks like and why